Good morning. My name is Claire Clark and I am from Dynam. We are supporting Highlands and Islands Enterprise to deliver this event today. It's great to have you all with us for this Business to Healthcare webinar. A very warm welcome to you all. Before I pass you over to Andrea McCall from HIE, I'd just like to spend a minute explaining how we will run today's webinar. As an audience member, you are automatically muted. We have a couple of ways for you to get actively involved. You can use your question box at any point throughout the webinar. We will pick up as many as we can during the Q&A. You'll also see an icon called the raised hand icon, and during question time, if you've got a mic and you want us to take you off mute so you can connect directly with our speakers, just click on that icon and we'll get you connected. And finally, we always want to promote knowledge sharing and collaboration, so we do record every session. We will, of course, share the recording after the event so you can watch again. That's all from me now. I'll pass you over to Andrea, who will introduce today's speaker. Andrea.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I've just wanted to welcome you all quickly. I'm Andrea McCall. I work in the Life Sciences team in Inverness at Highlands and Islands Enterprise. And we are hosting this webinar as part of our Business to Healthcare program. So the Business to Healthcare program is a business support program that is part of our suite of support programs we have within our Northern Innovation Hub. And as it says on the tin, Business to Healthcare is providing support for businesses who would like to sell products or services within the healthcare space. And the program is funded through the Inverness City Region deal and European funding. But as I said, the webinar is part of Business to Healthcare, and in particular today we are looking at selling to the consumer, which is obviously a little bit different to, for example, selling to the NHS or selling into other parts of the healthcare sector. So I'm delighted to introduce you now to Adrian Smith, who is the CEO of Digital Health Sense. And Digital Health Sense is the consultancy company who has been helping to deliver the Business to Healthcare program. And he will take you through the agenda for the day, for the webinar, and introduce all the individual speakers that we will have today as well. But delighted to hand over to Adrian now, and looking forward to finding out a lot more about selling to consumers.
Many thanks, Andrea, and let me add my thanks to everybody that's joined today. Particularly, if you don't mind my stealing the EasyJet phrase, to those frequent flyers are here. I notice on the participant list 2 or 3 people who have come to several of our webinars, which is great to see. Lovely to welcome you back. As Andrea has said, today's event is slightly different. Many of the webinars we've had so far have been very focused. So we've focused on a particular condition like diabetes, or we've focused on procurement processes in the NHS. And today, I think we've got a very varied set of speakers and some very varied themes, because working with consumers is a difficult and challenging but exciting marketplace to be in. So we've chosen, I think, a great mix of people to talk to you today. And I hope that you'll feel and learn some great things from each of them. So I'm going to introduce each of them properly separately, but the order of flow is as shown on the screen here. First, we're going to hear from Fiona at Orca, then Edwin from MDMC, and then we'll go across to Nicola from Vanilla Blush, and finally we'll end up with Iain at MapMyHealth. As I say, we'll introduce each one. Each of them has 10 to 12 minutes to speak to you, and you won't hear from me again unless at 10 minutes I interject and say, you've only got a couple of minutes left, and we'll try and keep very closely to schedule so that we do have a chance to tackle your questions at the end in the ways that Claire has described. So please do use the facilities that Claire took you through. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Fiona Costello from Orca. For those of you who don't know Orca, they're one of the most important and influential players, I think, at the moment in the healthcare marketplace, but I'm not going to explain any of that. Fiona, it's over to you.
Hi everybody, I'm Fiona Costello. I'm Vice President of National Accreditations at Orca. What that means in English is that I work with governments, regulatory bodies and policymakers to support their thinking around digital health assessment. But that actually isn't why I'm here today. Today I'm here to talk to you about digital health assurance and what does an emerging digital health infrastructure mean for the consumer. For those of you who aren't familiar with Orca, Orca is the organisation for the review of care and health apps. We are the world's leading assessor of digital health with a presence across 12 countries. We have a variety of different aspects to our services. There's Orca Assure, whereby we assess digital health products. There's Orca RX, where we make those products visible to different audiences. That can be the consumer, it can be healthcare professionals, patients and citizens. And we have Orca Insights, which is how we use data to support organisations with their thinking around their own products, how to sort of map out landscapes and so on. In terms of our assessment, since inception in 2015, we've conducted 20,000 assessments on a variety of products, including those that are facing consumers, for reasons that I'll come on to in the course of this presentation. But our mission and vision isn't actually to assess products, it's to make digital health healthy. Regardless of its ultimate business model, we're here to make sure that the apps are safe and effective and instill the trust and confidence of those who are intending on using them and those who will benefit from them. It's really lovely to be here today, so thank you to Adrian for inviting us to speak. I just wanted to share with you, before I go into the presentation, I just wanted to share with you a report that we published a couple of weeks ago, which was focused on period tracking apps in women's health. Now, for some of you may be aware that the vast majority of women's health period tracking apps do tend to be business to consumer business models. And what was really interesting about that report is that it highlighted that only one app kept sensitive data on mobile phone devices owned by the user. The rest shared that data with the app developer, allowing the sharing of personal sensitive health data to third parties, including 68% for marketing purposes. The reason why I wanted to tell you that story is because when we think about the consumer, whilst we may not be selling to healthcare organisations, the limitations around how we work with our consumers with regards to their data is really important, and that's what I'm here today to talk to you about with regards to how digital health assessment can support you in terms of framing the quality of your product and why consumers should use them. So we know that in the market today there are 365,000 digital health products to choose from. How do you demonstrate that your product is safe, effective and suitable for use? And how do you cut through to the consumer? If you go on Google Play or you go on Apple Store and you type in dementia, for example, you might get an education app, you might get a medical app, you might get a game app that's designed for memory training games. What you won't see is that there are up to 6,000 dementia apps available on the market today. And really what Orca is trying to do is, through digital health assessment, give visibility to those apps and demonstrate in really clear and concise ways the extent to which they've focused on usability and accessibility, professional assurance and data privacy and security, universal themes that regardless of the business model will cut through to those individuals who are using them. And the reason why we do this is because we believe that digital health, where it's couched as an alternative to face-to-face treatment, where it's couched as an alternative to mainstream healthcare delivery, we believe that the mistake at the moment is that we don't adopt the same approach as we do in other areas. And within Orca, we use an analogy around medication. So we have the Medicines Healthcare Regulatory Agency to approve and license drugs. We've got the National Institute of Clinical Effectiveness to assess their effectiveness, the British National Formulary to guide healthcare professionals on what drugs potentially to recommend. That doesn't extend just to healthcare, over-the-counter prescriptions. And finally, we've got e-prescribing to record and to track medications. But we don't have this for digital health, which can create this bit of a gap for consumers about how to source those technologies that they want to use, what they should be looking for, what matters to them, and so on. And we believe that this whole process starts with trust. So our digital health assessment frameworks are informed by NHS and local authority guidance. So this includes universal regulations and specific measures developed purely for digital health. So this is thinking about the NICE evidence standards framework for digital technologies. It's thinking about requirements for data privacy, so GDPR, usability and accessibility, the extent to which service users, those who you are targeting, have informed the development of your product. And also thinking about clinical assurance and evidence evaluation and security assessment. Data privacy and security is obviously really important, but particularly for consumer apps where there could be that potential benefit to making available third-party data. And it's not necessarily about saying that that shouldn't happen, but it's about transparency to maintain the trust and confidence of consumers. So where Orca comes in is we operate the Orca baseline review process. So the Orca baseline review process works with digital health suppliers to assess their product against 3 key domains. Those domains being usability and accessibility, professional assurance, and data privacy and security. We have taken over 9,000 products through this assessment process, and we work with a variety of business models. It can be business to consumer, business to consumer, direct to healthcare professional. It's a 350-point evaluation. It's been designed to be as independent and objective as possible, and really breaking down those different domains into a series of questions that are informed by this guidelines and best practice, so that for you as a digital health supplier, you're able to navigate the infrastructure as it applies to your product. So that's recognizing that if you think of a spectrum of digital health products ranging from kind of an administrative utility tool right through to a digital diagnostic or therapeutic, and adapts accordingly. So if, for example, your product is software as a medical device and needs CE marking, it will identify that and ensure that the right questions are applied to your product. At the end of that process, your product is given a score, and that score will determine whether you're surfaced onto the Orca Master App Library. The Orca Master App Library is essentially a repository of apps that have been through this process, and they are then drawn down by different systems to make available products to patients, citizens, healthcare professionals. But we do get a lot of uptake from business to consumer products as well, because they feel that visibility that comes from those libraries and formularies are a really useful way to cut through to audiences in a way that the App Store alone doesn't necessarily. As well as that, what we also do is once the product's gone through the assessment process with Orca and we've taken them through and allocated that score, we then get automatically updated if your product updates. So we will then take you automatically back through that assessment. So we're maintaining an ongoing view of your monitoring and compliance in relation to those standards, which provides another level of assurance. And we often find that our digital health suppliers will make available the fact that they have gone through the Orca certification as an external quality assurance validation of their product and their compliance in those different areas. And the access to the libraries is equally as important to them. So this is an example of a library, so it gives you a search carousel. So if, for example, your product is a dementia product and it's business to consumer, you can type in dementia, it will show the top rated apps right down to those that score lower. They're not a relative comparison to each other, they're just your individual scores against those different domains and then your overall score, and it will then give a breakdown of that criteria for the consumer. So it will say, for example, this app collects personal data or this app collects sensitive data. It makes available a privacy policy that shows what you're doing with data. And the whole purpose of this, our whole reason for existence, is to build that trust and confidence in these products, to make sure that where there are sort of myths and rumours about technology, how we use data, how these apps are designed to work, that that we start to break down those barriers to use, and that we maximise, particularly in the context of healthcare services that are under a lot of pressure, where we may see a shift in terms of how people consume their healthcare, particularly in the context of medical healthcare apps on mobile phones and web apps. So for us as Orca, with the trust is that regulatory infrastructure. They're not Orca standards, they're consolidated standards that come from best practice guidelines and recommendations from across the world. We have that awareness in terms of the assessment infrastructure, the score, the badges, what that means for you as a digital health supplier, the accessibility to the recommendation infrastructure. So irrespective of the business model of the app, your app can still be recommended, it's still made visible to the right audience. And finally, a governance and reimbursement infrastructure. So as part of that library, the audience will be able to see whether it's free or whether it's an in-app purchase or if there's a cost to download and so on. And then finally, we have a Digital Health Academy that's focused on really raising awareness, both from a healthcare professional perspective in terms of digital health, what's available, but also for digital health suppliers. So over the forthcoming year, we're going to be doing a lot more work in this space to build out our Digital Health Academy to support developers to navigate this space and to think about the issues that may well directly impact them. So, you know, I started this with talking about that period tracking app report that showed what those apps were doing with regards to data. And it's those types of issues that we'll tease out in these sessions, and thinking about how do you as an app reconcile your business interests, but do so in such a way that it complies with best practice in terms of the openness and transparency that you offer to consumers. And I think it's all the more important as we see consumerization within healthcare. So, you know, as I said, when we think about the NHS and the challenges facing the NHS here in the UK, we will see a creeping number of people moving over to sort of a more independent form of, you know, healthcare knowledge, healthcare activation, and so on. So it's still important that we as an industry maintain those standards to build confidence and to make these business models as sustainable as possible.
2 minutes, Fiona.
That's it. I've finished, Adrian. That was a whistle-stop tour of Orca. Obviously, any questions at the end?
Thank you. Sorry to interject with 2 minutes just as you were coming to the end. But thanks very much indeed. Very exciting, and I think for a lot of people, you know, the thousands of apps out there and how you make yours stand out from those thousands of apps is a critical thing on their journey. So next we're going to hand over to Edwin Lindsay, who's on the advisory board of MDMC. I'm going to let him explain exactly what that's all about and what they're up to. And over to you, Edwin.
Good morning, everybody. It says I'm on the board, advisory board of MDMC, where we're working with medical device companies and vitro diagnostic companies across Scotland on various aspects. We're based out of the Heriot-Watt University. We've got a lab there where we can bring in people, device companies that are early stage, looking for prototypes, just looking for advice, looking for help. And one of the areas that I help them with through my own company, Compliance Solutions, is from the regulatory aspect of medical devices and vitro diagnostics, taking it to market, or if they're already in the marketplace, if any issues come up with the current changing regulations across UK, Europe, and also the world, wherever they want to go to sell the product, and the fun and games that companies are coming across just now with the introduction of Brexit, new regulations in Europe, etc. So MDMC are there to help, not just from there, but from manufacturing, from commercial, etc. So there's a board of 3 or 4, and then there's an advisory board of maybe 20 with a vast experience of different areas within that, the medical device and vitro diagnostics sector. But what I'm going to cover today is around, although I mentioned medical devices, it's the same with in vitro diagnostics, just devices that are going into the home now. And this has come more with regards to post the pandemic of COVID and healthcare, people getting a lot more devices sent home to them rather than going into the hospital. A lot of companies are looking for ways of, or the hospital as well, are looking for ways of treating people in the home, sending devices home with them where simple word would be your granny using them, and trying to get around the regulators. As the regulations are getting harder, we're starting to see a lot more issues as it goes into the marketplace, but not just from the R&D point of view, developing this product, right through to when it's in the home, the issues in the home with people, things that you never thought of. But the regulators are clamping down on this. They're looking for a lot more information around what was mentioned in the previous slides about usability and about human factors. And that's one of the key areas, because you're going from a device or a product being used with a professional who's highly trained to a lay user. So people using it in the home, trying to work it out, going from it maybe people with different educations, different ways of left-handed, right-handed, different demographics, etc. So there's various things that come into play. Over the last 10 years, it has increased. People have been looking at it, trying to make it easier for people. It went exponentially during COVID. There was a lot of investment going into, especially around COVID tests, going from the self-test. People can do it in the home, where there was lots and lots of failures with that at the early stages. People did know about they found out various issues, but a third of medical device failures, this was from the FDA, was from use errors. And normally the usual issues are from manufacturing issues or development issues where they've maybe not thought of something. They've actually looked at it and thought they know that there's a third of the issues are coming from use errors. And this is why the regulators are starting to say up their game with regards to the regulations and what information they're looking for with medical devices when you're trying to get it approved to sell in that country. And what we're seeing is it's varying from country to country, even though we have a set of regulations or a set of standards that people follow, good practice. Every country is looking for different things. And in the past, it used to just be electrical devices. It's all devices that regulators are looking for some sort of human factors, usability aspect within your files for them to review to see can people use it, especially around when it's going to the home. Even if it was going to the home and it's still a prescription device, I know so a lot of the devices that are getting made are self-tests. You can buy them off the shelf, like pregnancy, COVID, buy them out of Boots, etc. You've got your blood pressure cuffs that you can buy at the chemist, etc. But you've also got devices that are what we call prescription devices. They're issued by the healthcare professional, but they're being used in the home by the lay user. And you're having to then give it out to them. They're having to monitor their condition, maybe come on a phone with them with telehealth care, but they're having to use the devices in the home on their own, where previously it may have been they'd have been monitored in the hospital. And as I say, these are starting to increase because of COVID, less access to hospitals, etc. But as I say, this is one of the key areas, especially when you're going from prescription to, as I say, lay user use or selling over the counter, as in selling from the shops to the customer, direct to the customer via even Amazon, etc. The scrutiny is increased tenfold of what the regulators are looking for with regards to what can go wrong. Have you covered all aspects of it? And a lot of companies or people who are developing devices look at their roadmap of where they're going to sell, and they look at potentially UK first, EU, US, and then further afield. A lot of them have all got different areas that you need to consider when you've got your device as you're taking things into consideration. And one of the biggest areas is your geographic location, age and structure of the home, who's in the home, and then your environmental hazards around the home, because you've got all sorts. But the geographic one could be are people used to technology? Can they use that? The age of the person. Could you give, I know my son teaches his granda how to use his iPhone, and all he uses that for is phoning and texting. But if you have to use it for anything more, my son teaches him how to use it for bringing up some healthcare information. So you're looking at where you're putting that to, who's going to be involved from a usability point of view, from an understanding point of view. Also, another example would be Wi-Fi. People presume everybody's got Wi-Fi. You may be in the UK, you can maybe have Wi-Fi, but some of the older generation don't have Wi-Fi. And if your device relies on that, how do they be able to use that? Will that person miss out on it? Same type of thing when I worked with a company that took a device to the US. They presumed that everybody had Wi-Fi, except the lower scale of the people who Medicaid, Medicare insurance, they didn't have Wi-Fi, so they had to provide some sort of router, Wi-Fi device to help them actually access the data, etc. Just because it was a device that was connected to the cloud via Wi-Fi. If it doesn't connect via Wi-Fi, or you don't have Wi-Fi, you're going to struggle. You've got children playing in it, etc. So there's pets. You're looking at all aspects of what could go wrong with that device, and can they use it? I put some examples, and these are real examples of what we've had to come across working with the devices over the last. I've worked with devices over 20 years, but especially the last 10 years, is what has went wrong when we were looking at the devices, and what has actually went wrong when we didn't think about it, or the people developing that device, or the company taking the device to market. What can go wrong? And the first one I've already covered, the tether console. What's their strength? Do they need a Wi-Fi booster up, downstairs, etc., etc.? So what we try and develop when we work with companies is looking at where are you going to put it, actually drilling it in, because a lot of people presume that that won't be an issue. It potentially will be, because if you've thought about it, there's a chance it could happen somewhere. So we have to. The regulators are now asking these questions. How do you deal with X, Y, and Z? And these are some of the issues we've seen, like length of cable, or if the power fails, how do we manage that? And there's a lot more of the pharmaceutical companies who are running clinical trials are looking to devices to help monitor these trials, and they're under a lot. They're starting to the pharmaceutical companies are starting to ask companies questions, because these devices will be used in the home, and they're used with the consumer, so they'll be used with the device, with the drug during the trial, but after the trial has been, the drug has been approved, these devices will be used. So, and probably the last one is misuse result. One of the regulators' fear is there's a lot of Google doctors, whether it's their family, whether it's their friend next door, their neighbour, or it's themselves, where they'll look at the information they're getting presented in front of them, and they'll try and interpret it themselves. And so it's like, can they misuse the result, etc. And that's one of the things that people look at, and they may not. Oh well, it doesn't say much. If they Google the wrong information, then it could be tragic for them, because they could lead to things going wrong. Also, with a wearable device, a lot of people don't like where it's been designed to be worn. People think, well, it's more comfortable if I put it instead of under the armpit, I'll put it on my belly. And we've seen this with various diabetes patches. It's meant to be worn on the belly, or it's meant to be worn on the side, but people, because it maybe rubs off or it's more comfortable, they'll move it, and they don't understand the consequences of moving it. Or because of the way the readings go, etc. So they're looking at, if somebody moves this, what information do you provide to them to actually help them say, well, that's sorry, you can't put it there. Will that be picked up from the monitoring side, from the doctor, the nurse, wherever, from the mobile aspect? If they're picking up, if they're monitoring it from afar via the cloud, can they pick that up that they've placed it wrong, etc.?
2 minutes, Edwin.
Okay, so what I would say, what we've tried to get with people is identify the problems, what can go wrong, and make sure, especially from a lay user point of view, are they going to be confident? This is what the usability trials are for. They can be expensive, but you look for, are they going to be confident to be using this? Is it easy to use? Are your instructions clear? And how can you improve it? And is there something missing that you can work? You're always going to be working to improve this, because you're dealing with human nature. You're dealing with people with different intelligence, different parts of the world as you take your device forward. I've put there, that's more for information, but that's the various things where we see things are going wrong, where we're having to deal with customer complaints, reportable incidents to the authorities when things go wrong, when patients are harmed or things are used wrong, and it's all linked to in the home. But that was, as I say, a whistle-top tour of usability with the regulatory world, but the regulations are becoming more and more around usability, what can go wrong, and what happens if it goes wrong. because the people are pushing this more and more, and they are cutting back on stopping people actually taking it to the home if they don't have the right information.
Many thanks, Edwin. That's great, and I think it's particularly pertinent at the moment. The NHS, amongst many other organisations in the world, is trying really hard to move in the direction of virtual wards, remote monitoring, hospital at home, putting equipment out there more and more to stop people having to go to the clinic, and all of those human factors and usabilities that you've just talked about, as well as the infrastructure, the Wi-Fi and the connectivity, are all big challenges on that journey. So I think a great summary. Thanks ever so much indeed. Now a complete change of tack, or at least I think it's a complete change of tack. We're going to hand over to Nicola Dames from Vanilla Blush, and I know, Nicola, you're not going to be using any slides, so we'll leave it up to you and the beautiful environment behind you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Nicola Dames, and I think it's important that I tell you a little bit about me before I talk about what it is I do. But my background, I was a neurointensive care nurse, and just before I qualified, I was diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease, and that meant that I had years of medication to try and keep the inflammatory bowel disease at bay, but unfortunately that failed, and I ended up having a stoma created here in Glasgow in 2006. Prior to becoming an intensive care nurse, I actually worked in fashion in Dublin. And so I learned about branding, I learned about image and the importance of logos and stuff like that. And then I ended up with the surgery. So I have to now be able to create the two things that I love, which is your fashion and medicine. And so I had my surgery in March 2006, and by November 2007, I had a product I could take to market. And in February 2008, we launched our business live on national television, This Morning Show. The reason why I did all of that was because having a stoma and having a bag, although I was well supported for that, it meant for me, I just didn't want my bag on show. It was nothing that I was ashamed of. In fact, my stoma bag gave me the ability to have a much better quality of life. But practically, it was an inconvenience sometimes with the type of underwear that I was wearing. And having researched the marketplace, there definitely was product out there, but it tended to be geared towards an older community. I was 29 when I had my surgery and still felt this need to still feel and look feminine. So I decided to create my own. I am rubbish at sewing, but I was good at drawing and good at design. And as I say, the business launched in 2008, live on national television. It was very much like a part-time business of supplying products to people, little bits and pieces of, people who just wanted to buy something online, saw us and ordered it from us. We sent it all out. I was making sure, in the early stages, I was ironing everything and making sure everything was just so beautifully packaged, which I still do to this day. But it was something that I had a lot more time to do from 2008 to 2011. And then in 2011, we decided to look at how we would grow the business more. And there was an increasing need of this product that we had created. So we decided to go down the listing of this product as a Class 1 medical device on the National Health Service. We were accepted on the National Health Service, and I'm sure other people will allude to this as well. There is a lot of hurdles you have to jump through. We jumped through all those hurdles and became accepted in 2011 for a particular range of product. We then went on from there, and in 2013, we got more product successfully listed on the National Health Service in both England and Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, but we were doing all of this from a garage in the back of my garden, and we just thought, right, we really need to, basically you'd be sitting in the garage and you'd look up and there'd be a person in your garden because they thought we were a store. So in 2014, we decided to actually open the globe only specialist underwear store catering for people who have an ostomy. We're not exclusive to ostomy, we are inclusive of ostomy, which means anybody can wear our product. It just happens to be specially adapted on the inside should you have a stoma bag. So we opened the store. We had the Minister for Health open the store here, and we have just grown as a company. We're available to be prescribed now in England. England is our biggest market. England and the Republic of Ireland, we are prescribed. We're also prescribed in Denmark, Portugal, Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands, and we've just grown a lot. We have obviously COVID, we're an online business, so which is really good, and but we do get a lot of people who just walk through the door. You might have noticed that I said that we are available to be prescribed in England and the Republic of Ireland, because a little while ago we have been available to be prescribed in Scotland up until about 2019, and then some arbitrary decision was made and vanilla blush products were removed from drug tariff in Scotland. However, we are going through the process of having that reinstated, because why should the people of Scotland not be able to access a product that's available, that's going to improve their quality of life and help with their body image and self-esteem when across the border they can get it. So many challenges and issues that one faces when you're supplying Class 1 medical devices. You know, as the gentleman before me spoke about, the compliance, as in you wouldn't believe that, you know, even a pair of pants, you have to do an information for use leaflet that tells the client how to put on a pair of pants, and it goes like step one leg in this hole, step another leg in this. So it's so important that your regulatory process is kept up to date, and that the person who receives your product understands completely how to use that product. And it may sound really stupid, but actually a pair of pants, you need to tell them how to do it. I can't think of anything else to really tell you other than that we're based in the East End of Glasgow, and we're very passionate about what we do. The other aspect of what I do is, because I'm also a patient, I'm in a very unique position that I'm also able to advise and influence language around disclosing medical information to these patients, about how we process basically how patients are treated from the start of their journey right through to living with the condition. I have become a researcher. I'm a very proud published first author during lockdown, and doing things, for example, about living with the stoma and the impact that has on the patient's body image and self-esteem. And when you have budgetary constraints and you have a group of sometimes non-medical people making really, really important decisions about people who do have a medical condition, and you don't have people who do have that medical condition on the board helping making these decisions or guide these decisions, these are things that we try and change. So you need to ask the patients, what is it that are the biggest issues? And one of the things that we did was, particularly in our industry, is about body image and self-esteem, was asking about intimacy after having a stoma, for example, and pelvic floor surgery, and we got together patient representative voices, and we got published there last year in the Colorectal Disease magazine, which is really, really big magazine in our industry, and it was myself, 2 other patients, and 3 colorectal surgeons. So I very much have a research background and love all things research-wise, and if my business was to go in the morning, I would be straight in completing my PhD, which I have deferred a couple of times now. But that's us in a nutshell. If you want to know about anything, just please ask me.
Fabulous. What a wonderful story, and great that you did it from the store as well. I think it's really cool to see that it's all there in action in the background as well. One of the things I'm going to be picking up in the questions is the theme that you talked about how strange it is that in one of the UK countries you can access solutions and then not in another one, just across the road, across the border. We'll pick up on that, I think, in the questions, but thank you very much indeed. So we come to our final session now, and it was interesting that you, Nicola, talked about from a prescribing direction, and I know that when Iain comes to talk to us now, Iain's going to come at it from a different direction, because Iain's business has taken a particular decision to go down a very specific prescribing route, and I think that partly because there are some real challenges about how you access the consumer market. I'm stealing, pardon me, I'm stealing Iain's thunder. So let me hand over to Iain from MapMyHealth. Iain, all yours.
Can you hear me? Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, thanks very much to the organisers for inviting me to this panel. As Adrian said, I am going to sort of take a bit of a different approach because we don't currently sell to consumers directly. So I'd like to thank the previous speakers because I've gained a lot of insights there about the sort of things that we need to be thinking about. The tack I'm going to take is while we don't currently sell to consumers, we are working up our direct to consumer channel for sales, and I'd really like to sort of focus on the strategy of selling to healthcare and the benefit that subsequently has to selling to consumers. So I'll start off with a bit of a background of who I am and what our business does. So MapMyHealth was founded in 2012 to tackle the growing issue of effective management of long-term illness. We're a medtech business that supports healthcare organisations and individuals self-manage. That's done in collaboration with the healthcare team, and that was something which we felt was really important early on. Is that really while what we're selling is really direct to the individual and to be used by the individual, that should be done in the larger context of their healthcare support from the healthcare system. And so our vision is for empowered individuals to make positive lifestyle changes to improve their health and live longer, better quality lives. And our primary focus is diabetes, although our approach is applicable to all long-term conditions. We provide online education, support, and behaviour change approaches. We chose diabetes because, as well as being our area of expertise when we started the business, it's really an archetypal long-term condition that lends itself to effective self-management. So things that individuals can do to help improve their condition. And of course, it's a major contributor to poor clinical outcomes and costs in all modern healthcare systems. If you look at the most common causes of death in England, and actually in most Western countries, heart disease and stroke are the most common in people aged over 50. And while death rates due to heart disease and stroke have approximately halved since 2001, largely due to improvements in prevention, management and treatment, important modifiable risk factors such as being overweight or having diabetes haven't declined at all. In fact, they've increased. And that has a significant impact on the future of health, both for our nation as well as the cost of delivering healthcare. The global burden of disease model ranks risk factors based on the proportion of deaths that are associated with them. You'll note that in all cases, these risk factors are associated with cardiovascular disease and in most cases with diabetes. You'll also notice that most of these risk factors are modifiable through behaviour change and self-management. And that situation is only set to get worse. The average age of diagnosis for diabetes has been steadily falling over the last few decades, and at the same time our population, like all industrialised countries, has been ageing. So by 2032, the prediction is that there will be 3 times as many over 65s than there are under 20s compared to the 1950s. In the UK, the percentage of the population who are over 50, the group where cardiovascular disease and diabetes is the leading cause of death, has been steadily increasing from around 24% in 1950 to 38% now, and projected to increase to 40% in the next decade. So diabetes, as many of you would probably know, is also one of the highest risk factors for severe outcomes in COVID. And so while this problem is getting significantly worse, it's going to require innovative, cost-effective solutions at scale. And that's where patient self-management comes in, and it's widely recognised as being the foundation of all good diabetes management, and when implemented well can have real benefits both to individual patients and the healthcare system in terms of improving outcomes and reducing costs. Unfortunately, delivering this is traditionally via group-based education has proven to be quite difficult. And a decade ago when we started, only 17% of people newly diagnosed with diabetes were actually referred to diabetes education, and that's now fallen back to around 65% from a peak of around 85% just prior to the pandemic. But despite the improvements in referrals, the actual uptake of this really important foundational service hasn't really changed much at all. And the reasons for that are lack of capacity in the system, access issues for individuals, and also personal choice. A lot of people don't want, for instance, to discuss their healthcare issues in a group setting. And the solution to all those problems is digital, and that's where our flagship service, MapMyDiabetes, fits. We provide self-management education, skill development and support for people to put that education into practice in terms of improving their diabetes. And we've got lots of accreditations and badges to show that we're doing that well and meeting all the various regulatory requirements. And I'll come back to this point in a moment. We've also got great data on delivery. We can demonstrate uptake and usage that's industry leading, so 64% for us compared to other digital approaches, and 6% in terms of uptake of face-to-face education. And we've shown significant benefit in clinical outcomes, and this is equivalent lowering of blood glucose to a pharmaceutical drug, which, by the way, is what I spent most of my career doing prior to starting with MapMyHealth. But whilst we've got we've identified a real market need, we've got a good solution that can help deliver significant benefits, not just to individuals by helping them achieve better health, but also to the healthcare system by improving their efficacy and effectiveness, and as well as reducing the cost of delivering healthcare and the resource draining issue of those long-term complications of diabetes. That also impacts wider society through fewer deaths, improved health, less time off work, and of course the cost of delivering healthcare. But as I'm sure everyone in this audience knows, selling healthcare products is not really that straightforward. And so what I'd like to finish with is the review of several of the hurdles we face, mainly selling to the NHS, but also to other private organisations who ultimately sell to consumers. And of course, people who are consuming healthcare are also inextricably linked into the healthcare system. So this whole thing is an interlinked ecosystem. And what I'd like to do is try to highlight areas that might also be opportunities to differentiate or gain a competitive edge. And finally, we need to kind of reiterate this point that selling to the NHS itself is often the selling point for selling to consumers. If you've developed a service or a product within, or it's been accredited by the NHS, that's a strong brand association, which you can really use to help differentiate yourself from competitors who haven't got that background. So we're in a complex regulatory and political environment in all healthcare systems, in all territories, and but also from an organisational point of view. So many people believe the NHS is a single thing, a single monolithic behemoth organisation. I tend to think of it more like a swarm of bees in the shape of an elephant. It consists of thousands of organisations, many of which are private, such as All GP Practice, for instance, and there are 10,000 of those in England alone. And as a result, there are many sort of political aspects you need to be aware of, and any clinical area is likely to have local champions and gatekeepers, as well as national and central, NHS England, stakeholders and political agendas, as well as competing interests, for instance, from the charity sector. And it's really important to be aware of all this, understand what those agendas are and how they might influence procurement decisions if you're selling to healthcare, or the environment if you're selling to consumers. And it would certainly behoove people to think about and find out who those key individuals are in your domain and understand their agenda, because they could end up being allies or even collaborators. Regulation is constantly evolving and always growing. Gaining accreditation or certification, as we've just heard from Nicola, is complex, it's bureaucratic, it's time-consuming and often expensive, and it varies by geography. On the other hand, the process of achieving them is often a required ticket to entry in many domains, and it does increase quality, which is always desirable in healthcare. It also provides credibility, both for private customers and consumers, and can be a barrier to entry to your competition. And of course, there are now great companies like Orca that can help you navigate this landscape with a minimum of pain. I speak from experience. Evidence bases. The NHS loves its evidence bases, but I've often found that the scientific rigour for this is often lacking or political in nature, and I think we just need to look at the mass mandates in many NHS organisations in light of a complete lack of evidence for mask efficacy in preventing transmission of respiratory virus infections. And of course, it's right that medical interventions and devices do have an evidence base to show they work, they're safe, and can demonstrate a positive cost benefit. But often the term evidence base can be used as an excuse not to engage. And just because you generate evidence for your offering doesn't give you a guarantee of a sale. So I think it's really important to be really clear about what evidence you need to generate in order to substantiate your claims of safety, efficacy, and value. But don't waste time generating data that already exists or that may not be necessarily relevant. For instance, if there's an existing evidence base for similar solutions or approaches, try to leverage that as much as possible. You shouldn't be expected to recreate an evidence base at great expense and, in fact, ethically delaying bringing a genuinely helpful product to benefit patients and the healthcare service. You can think about bridging studies and real-world data that can be generated perhaps in parallel to doing paid-for pilots to support the safety and efficacy profile of your product and getting regulatory accreditation and so on. But most importantly, focus on what matters to your customer. And we've heard that from the previous two speakers, that is absolutely key, is understand what the pain point is for your customer and make sure that your solution and your evidence addresses that. Just
2 minutes here.
Yep.
2 minutes here.
Sorry, Adrian, I keep talking over you. What did you say?
Yeah, I'm just telling you it's 2 minutes. 2 minutes to go. I've just.
Yeah. So the decision makers are typically not the clinical leads and commissioners. You need them on board and fighting in your corner, but ultimately decisions typically are made by the board, and the financial director has a final say. So the cost benefit argument is really important when selling to healthcare organisations and certainly businesses. Champions and gatekeepers, again, I've sort of talked about this, but in terms of the clinical lead and commissioner, help them make the case for your product or service by providing them with evidence and so on, but also help them shape the narrative in the business case. And that's also true in selling to consumers and embedding your service with the support of the healthcare service is getting the people who are champions in that area on side is really key. And finally, if I had to sum up in one word what is required to sell into any market, I'd say it's tenacity. Not giving up, or what my wife calls stubbornness, is probably the most useful quality you can have. Good luck.
Many thanks, Iain. And I know you kicked off and said you're not at the moment selling direct to the consumer, but lots of those lessons I think are critical to anybody trying to look at the consumer market anyway. You've got to go through some of those hurdles and challenges if you're going to get your product, as others have said, positioned in a way that makes the consumer market excited to grab your product. So I think we're all going to come back together. So as chair, I'm going to get the opportunity to ask the first question. And anybody can answer it, but I'm particularly looking at Fiona and Edwin here. So one of the things that I experience again and again is organisations in the UK that develop something exciting, and then because of some of the challenges that Iain's talked about, take their whether it's consumer or to the health system, take it overseas first, because it's so difficult to go through the hurdles that we have here. So I guess partly, Fiona, because you talked about being in so many different countries and pulling together all of the different regulations and certifications, some of that challenge is a cultural one in this country, but is it also down to easier regulation and certification in other countries? Are we doing it wrong here? Could we help organisations get off the ground quicker?
I don't think we're doing it wrong. I think, you know, I think there's kind of a sort of an industry perspective on what good looks like, and whether sort of an unmarshaled environment is what you would prefer, I guess, so to speak. I know that, you know, in the context of other countries, what we do have is really clear parameters that actually digital health suppliers really welcome. They welcome having that opportunity to stock take using the Orca baseline review, for example, as a kind of a foundation level assessment to guide that, with the view that it's being built from sort of looking at the global landscape. But I think relative to other countries, for example, you know, we've been doing a lot of work in Australia, and what we see is that in Australia, as a point of comparison, they near enough exclusively go offshore because there's so little guidance, so little regulation, so little infrastructure there at the moment that makes it much, much harder to navigate. Whereas actually, whilst we do have kind of, you know, legacy EU, we have kind of clear guidelines, parameters and frames. It does mean that we're, you know, really globally leading actually in terms of having a route. It might not be an easy route, but it is a defined route. And I think in many ways that's far easier than navigating a Wild West. You know, I don't think it's any coincidence that some of the apps that are direct to consumer that have chosen not to go down that route are also the ones that are exposed for selling data to Facebook, for example. And I think it's what you as an organisation prioritise.
And what about the point? Thank you. What about the point that Nicola raised about you can something can be accredited in Scotland? This is the other way around, wasn't it? You can't get it in Scotland, but you can get it in Ireland. It's a crazy situation.
Yeah, it is, and I think, you know, certainly there is work to be done. Like, of course there is. You know, there are sort of geopolitics at play here, but I think, as I said, if you kind of go with a baseline assessment standard and you're able to demonstrate a form of compliance or a form that you are, you know, looking at external quality assurance, that's really, really helpful and will certainly make those conversations easier than kind of going without any form of quality assurance would be my take on it. But obviously, Nicola, you know, you have a different experience. It's been lived through, you know, lived experience of it. But I do appreciate that certainly within the sort of the home nations, there are those disparities which make it harder to navigate. And that's something that Orca is continually striving to break down, because as we said, you know, we want to make it a lot easier. And that's why when we talk about the Orca baseline review in the context of apps, it's designed to be that global foundation level assessment that draws on a range of different guidelines and regulations and best practice and not specific to a single country.
Okay, thank you. Iain.
Yeah, I wasn't able to find the digital hand, so I've just used my real one. So just to add to that point, I think certainly in the software realm where it's quite hard to get patents for software applications, then all the other things that you can do in order to protect your product or your service, you know, is all good, obviously. So things like accreditations and regulatory know-how and so on are part of that mix, I think. So I think the point that Fiona makes about navigating these different landscapes, if companies choose not to go down that route, then ultimately they're going to be in the mix with the tens of thousands of consumer apps. Whereas if you're more down the medical device or medical software route, then that gives you an advantage, I think, in this sector.
Adrian, I'll throw in one last thing. The regulations in the device sector, or IVD, with whatever it is getting harder. Europe is probably the hardest. Then for UK will probably follow suit once they sort it out after Brexit. And a lot of the companies we're working with, we're actually going to the US first now because of especially from a regulator, if it's to go through a notified body who, if it's class 1, that's all self-certification. But if it's to go through a regulator, i.e. like BSI, TV, SUD, etc., to approve your product, the backlog there is huge. Just getting into them is huge, but even because they're running behind, and even the new regulations is technically, it was a sledgehammer to crack a walnut, and that's coming from a regulated person who's run off her feet with it. It's stopping innovation. The US is probably, it was always the hardest route to go. It still is, but it's easier to get into because you still understand it. They are more open to questions. But I don't know what the MHRA are going to change. From what we know, the MHRA are going to potentially follow the same rules as Europe because they were involved in all this, but they've not confirmed it as in rubber stamp saying this is what's going to happen. But yes, if any of these products or devices, yes, you're going to it's going to be hard to get it to market. And you'll be looking at, if you're a new company, you're looking, and it has to go through BSI or TUV or SGS, you're talking in between 6 months and 2 years.
Okay, fabulous, everyone. Look, we've hit 12 o'clock, but I'm going to ignore the fact that we've hit 12 o'clock and ask Claire if there are any questions in the chat.
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions through. This one I'll direct to Nicola. This is from Roma. She said, firstly, your journey is incredibly inspirational. What a fantastic product. What would you say is your biggest your biggest challenge has been when registering your product as a medical device?
I would say, now remember, I'm going back pre-Brexit and COVID and everything, so I'm going back as far as 2011. I would say that was the easiest part. The hardest part is now is you go through the whole regulatory process, you learn how to navigate the system, you get through, then you hit the gatekeepers, who, despite everything you've done and the evidence that you can produce and the research that you may have backing you, they will still have inherent bias and opinions that may actually leave you to the side. So I would say the actual regulatory process for us, because we know I have a medical background, I understand parts of law, blah, blah, blah. I understand the whole compliance. I have served my time. I know it kind of in and out now. Obviously, I'm not no expert, but I'm saying that's the easier part for us. The harder part is then convincing somebody that your product deserves a place at the table like everybody else's does. And in some way, if I was to pick up on that point as well, for me, sometimes the medtech, the applications, the stuff that Iain's doing, even that what Fiona's talking about, to me, because it's not, although it's not a physical product, so it is a very, very different sell, so to speak, because it's very, I believe it's easier, but I could be wrong, to engage people on an app potentially than to actually get in front of that person and show them your product logistically as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, Nicola, that it's easier to engage them, but like all these things, that's just the first step, and then actually then getting to the point where you've got a contract is getting them to make a decision. The points you just made are certainly absolutely our experience. There are these people who raise objections, or it doesn't matter what accreditation you put forward, or what evidence you put forward, it doesn't make any difference. So that's a real frustration, and it's a real drag, I think, on bringing these new products and innovations to market, which is ultimately a bad thing, I think.
Fabulous. One more question then, Claire.
I think one more question. We have had a few questions through. It's great to see everyone so engaged. So if we haven't answered your question, we will follow up after post-event. But yeah, time for one more. This is for you, Iain. What have you found to be the best approach for engaging with the correct, appropriate influencers / decision makers in the ever-changing NHS marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, it's much more difficult now that we never meet physically anymore. But I would say it's getting to know, who are the commissioners working in your area, and work out what the network of people are, the influencers in that area. That's it's boots on the ground doing the hard miles. I'm afraid there's no sort of easy answer to that. But I think once you start building those relationships and understand what their constraints are from a strategic implementation and often financial budgetary constraints, then that helps, I think, you to shape your narrative and your arguments, but also gets them on board and fighting your corner, which ultimately is what you're going to need to get that business case through, certainly in the NHS.
Fabulous. Thank you very much indeed, all of our presenters. As Claire has just said, there are some other questions. I hope you won't mind if we pass some of those to you. And don't be surprised if some of the people on the call today follow you up and pester you for further advice and guidance. I hope that's okay too. So I'll hand back, I think, to Andrea just to close us down.
Yes, thank you very much, all of you, for such very interesting perspectives coming from different parts, I suppose, of the landscape, different experiences, and everyone, adding a lot of information and promoting some good questions. So yeah, we'll follow up on the back of some of them. But thank you very much for your time. That was really interesting, and I just wanted to finish off by pointing everyone to the Business to Healthcare program and the website where you can find out more information, because as we were just saying there, it is about putting the effort in and getting to those gatekeepers, understanding where they're coming from, and seeing how you present yourself, how you present your product, and what you need to do to overcome some of those challenges after you've done all the other hard work already around regulation and other things. So we'd really recommend you have a look at the website and get expert advice and support with some of the introductions, some of the journey you need to undertake yourself, obviously, but there is support available. So really, it would be great to see some of you as part of the program going forward. And thank you very much again to our speakers and Adrian as well for hosting such an interesting session again. And the recording will be available afterwards as well. So please share with anyone else who might be interested in finding out more about the topic.
Great, thanks, Andrea. On behalf of Highlands and Islands Enterprise, a big thank you to everyone that came in to join the webinar. Our post-event survey will pop up straight after this session, so if you can spare a couple of minutes, it would be great if you could complete that for us. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.